The Runaway Millionaire, Rise and Fall of John McAfee. For many years, people have wondered if there is a connection between brilliance and lunacy, personal trauma and eagerness to succeed. Such seems to be the case of a once millionaire tech entrepreneur, software avant-garde engineer, then turned yoga guru, cabin glider, failed app developing, libertarian presidential runner, and a criminal on multiple charges to boot. And this is all before things got really weird. An all-around internet legend, if not urban myth, John McAfee. This is Moolah TV. But before we start, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss any of our videos. Now, let's begin our journey into one of the weirdest millionaires ever. Well, look no further, probably, than to that right bottom corner of your computer screen and that pesky little notification that seems to pop up every 5 minutes. That's right! John McAfee himself was the founder and creator of the McAfee Antivirus company. Believe it or not, the first commercial antivirus company in the history of America. Today, we'll be taking a look at his early life, his exploits and successes, his not-so-exploits and successes, brushes with the law, and his ultimate untimely demise. This was John McAfee, the so-called runaway millionaire. Early life, early tragedy. McAfee was born in Cinderford, in the Forest of Dean, Gloucestershire, in the foggy old United Kingdom on a certain 18th of September, 1945. Already the circumstances of his birth and conception were quite unusual. You see, he was born on a U.S. Army base of the 596th Ordnance Ammunition Company, to an American father, Don McAfee, who was stationed there and had remained there after the Allies defeated the Nazis in Europe, and a British mother, Joan Williams. His father was from Roanoke, and McAfee was himself primarily raised in Salem, Virginia, United States. He said he felt as much British as American, a child of two worlds, if you will. In Virginia, his father worked as a road surveyor, and his mother as a bank teller, on the surface giving the impression of a run-of-the-mill post-war American middle-class family. Nothing could be further from the truth. In McAfee's own words, his father Donald was a raging, violent, alcoholic monster and would physically beat his son and wife with terrifying regularity. This behavior ultimately ended with Donald McAfee's suicide by gunshot in 1961. John McAfee was 15 years old, and one can only imagine what growing up in such an environment could have done to his psyche. That being said, it certainly doesn't seem to have done anything to his entrepreneurial spirit, which would start to show as early as his college sophomore years. Education, rebel without a PhD. After graduating high school, by his own account, John McAfee sold magazine subscriptions to fund his undergraduate math degree at Roanoke College, and ended up making a small fortune, a glimpse at what would be a future of constant business ventures and hunts for opportunities to make capital that would make up much of his life. He finished his bachelor's in 1967, but spent much of his cash and certainly his study time getting drunk and partying. His degree in mathematics subsequently awarded him an honorary Doctor of Science degree in 2008. After receiving his bachelor's degree, McAfee began working towards a doctorate in mathematics at Northeast Louisiana State College, where he also began to teach. He was eventually expelled around 1968, not only for his constant partying and drinking, mind you, but for starting an, let's say, ill-advised sexual relationship with an undergrad student. This early show of mixing academic excellence and technological and economical savviness with contempt for regulation, authority, laws, and sexual misbehavior would set the tone for the rest of McAfee's prolific career. After exiting the world of academia, McAfee would spend the following decade and a half working for some of the most prestigious technology-related institutions of their time. And even to this day, McAfee was employed as a programmer by NASA's Institute for Space Studies in New York City from 1968 to 1970, working on the Apollo program. From there, he went on to UNIVAC as a software designer and later to Xerox as an operating system architect. In '78, he joined Computer Sciences Corporation as a software consultant. He worked for consulting firm Booz Allen Hamilton from 1980 to 1982. Eventually landing in Lockheed Industries. Now, that's an impressive resume if you've ever seen one. But one has to wonder why it was that John McAfee kept being bounced around from one impressive-sounding tech job to the next. Fact is that while he was trailblazing his way through these companies, McAfee was also trailblazing his way through drug use. More specifically, psychotropics such as marijuana, LSD, and his personal favorite, DMT. McAfee said once that everyone in his field seemed to have a similar interest in, chemical compounds, that as they were exploring the edge of technological progress, they were also exploring the edge of personal progress. That being said, no one seemed to take this aspect of it as seriously as McAfee himself, and it would very quickly make it hard for him to hold steady employment. For a while, McAfee got clean. Around 1983, after a stint in Alcoholics Anonymous, he would relapse a few decades later, though. McAfee Antivirus, the rise. It would be in 1986, though, while employed by Lockheed, that McAfee would stumble upon a personal, political, technological, and of course financial crusade that would set and last the rest of his life. There, he read about the brain computer virus for the PC, and he found it terrifying. But he also sensed a business opportunity. He went about creating an antivirus software that could detect the computer virus and remove it automatically, pre-packaged and pre-designed for what would quickly become the office space of tomorrow. And to distribute and sell this antivirus package in the open market, he funded the now legendary McAfee Associates. Eventually, he would quit his job at Lockheed and dedicate himself not only to the growth of his company, but also to spreading the word, one might even say the fear, of potential computer virus attacks across America and the globe. In doing so, he managed to turn a company with an originally limited user and customer base into a rapidly growing giant of the tech industry. Needless to say, being the first not just in the business, but also the first to let most of everyone even know about the business proved extremely profitable. By 1990, McAfee was making a whopping personal $5 million a year. The company was incorporated in Delaware in 1992 and had its initial public offering the same year. At its height, John's personal fortune was that of $100 million, and the company would eventually be worth billions of dollars in the early and mid-2000s. It wasn't all roses and daisies, though. McAfee's, the guy, not the company, let's say rough personality, also made him hard to deal with for other board members and higher-ups of the company. In August 1993, McAfee stepped down as chief executive and remained with the company as the chief technical officer. He was succeeded by Bill Larson. In 1994, he sold his remaining stake in the company. He had no further involvement in its operations, but made more than a pretty penny with the sales of his action. That being said, his relationship with the company was ruined. McAfee, again the man not the company, would spend the rest of his life bad-mouthing both the product and the corporation he helped create, at once referring to it as the worst piece of bloatware ever created, and constantly recommending his followers, of which he would have many in the years to come as he became a social network phenomenon and a living meme, to never use them. McAfee, this time the company, not the guy, would reach its apex without its founder on 2010, when it was purchased by Intel for a staggering $10 billion. So now, with freedom, a head full of chemicals, and a lot of change in his pocket, what was John McAfee to do? Well, he would say pretty much whatever he wanted, but as everyone in the world of business knows, fortune doesn't last forever. The other ventures. The fall. Other business ventures that were founded by McAfee included Tribal Voice, which developed one of the first instant messaging programs, which is to say, it's WhatsApp's granddad, Powwow. You can probably tell it never really took off. In 2000, he invested in and joined the board of directors of Zone Labs, makers of firewall software, prior to its acquisition by Checkpoint Software. Also not a lot of waves there. In the 2000s, McAfee invested in and advertised ultralight flights, which he marketed as aerotrekking, whatever that means. He also had the bright idea of putting gliders on cabins that would fly people around in a sort of luxury cabin flight. He called it, allegedly, Icarus's dream come true. Needless to say, none of this, took off the ground. In the midst of all this, McAfee also went back to psychotropics and spiritual advancement, apparently to the point where he generated such a resistance to the stuff, he could take in a whole pound bag of DMT. He wrote and self-published not one, not two, but 4 yoga spirituality books. And then came 2008. In August 2009, the New York Times reported that McAfee's personal fortune had declined to $4 million, from its starting $100 million due to the effect of the financial crisis and his poor investment history. In February 2010, started the company Quorum X, headquartered in Belize, which supposedly aimed to produce herbal antibiotics that disrupt quorum sensing in bacteria. This was the company that would prove to be McAfee's undoing. Things get dark. McAfee, the criminal. In Belize, at first, Quorum X contributed to the impoverished community that surrounded his villa, investing in electricity and clean water. Not much later, McAfee began to employ a small army of heavily armed hitmen and kept a harem of 7 young women, some reportedly teens, who lived with him. Witnesses claim he was erratically paranoid and convinced government agencies were out to get him, a belief that would pursue him until his final days. In April of 2012, on suspicion of a methamphetamine lab, the gang suppression unit of Belize's police force raided Quorum X's research facility, where they confiscated both McAfee's passport and licensed weapons, a lot of them, shot one of his dogs, and briefly imprisoned him before charges of unlicensed drug manufacturing and unlicensed weapon possessions were dropped. When the police arrived, they found McAfee in bed with a 16-year-old girl. But the drop that kicked his proverbial bucket would be his neighbor, Florida builder and also expat, Gregory Fowle. Allegedly, Fowle complained that McAfee allowed his pack of dogs to run freely on their shared beachfront. He became so exasperated that he poisoned some of the dogs in November of 2012, and a few days later Fowle was found shot dead in his kitchen by his housekeeper. Before even being formally charged by local authorities, McAfee found himself fleeing to Guatemala seeking asylum, which was refused to him. He eventually found himself in Miami, where he was charged with tax evasion and imprisoned. While under arrest, McAfee faked 2 heart attack instances and escaped back to Spain, where he was eventually detained by authorities and a court of law agreed to extradite him back to America. Now, during all of this, McAfee constantly held interviews and tweeted and kept his presence on the internet and social media very active, ranting and raving about secret government sects and shady world-controlling interests chasing after him. Keeps getting weirder towards the last days of his life. He claimed that soon he would be suicide, and as if on cue, not long after the verdict that meant he would have to be charged and trialed in US soil, McAfee was found dead in his cell, and the coroner's report of his cause of death being suicide. With all this being said, one can take the case of John McAfee as a cautionary tale of success and the pitfalls of addiction, trauma, and criminal behavior. No matter what challenges or landmarks one might make and surpass, or throwing everything away for vice and pleasure. Was John McAfee a victim of his early life? Or was he a dangerous and raving lunatic with a lot of financial luck? Leave a like and tell us your thoughts in the comments. Till next time.